right. Well, as our attendees flood in, I'm happy to welcome everyone back. Welcome back, all of you MO pros. We're happy to have you here. My name is Tara Dwyer. I'm going to be your host here on the back end for today's session. And today we're going to be discussing strategies to tackle all of your data quality challenges. I'm joined by Jess Kao.
Leave with like a lawsuit.
Let's just make sure. Okay, here we go. I'm joined by Jess Kao, Senior Marketing Operations Leader, Ali Rastiello, VP of Revenue Operations at Health Catalyst, and Camela Thompson, Head of Marketing at RevOps Co-op. So without further ado, Camela, I'm going to pass things over to you to kick us off.
Alrighty then. So I am going to try to share the deck. And hopefully, can everybody see the deck?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So we had a quick intro for each of us, but I think I'm going to let us go into a little bit more detail. I am here because I wrote the report that we're basing a lot of our findings on, and it was a research or a survey that went out to marketingops.com and RevOps Co-op, and we collected a lot of information. The reason why I think I'm qualified to talk on the topic. I know it says head of marketing, but I spent 15 years in operations, spanning marketing, sales, and customer success operations. And I've been a Marketo, HubSpot, Eloqua, Zoho, and Salesforce admin. Ali, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I'm VP of RevOps at Health Catalyst right now. I'm actually transitioning a little bit and going to be more focused on marketing than sales, which is exciting for me, because marketing is my bread and butter and background. I've spent 20 years now in B2B marketing. 11 of those were in leadership positions at Rackspace, BigCommerce, Cornerstone On Demand, and now at Health Catalyst. So love me some data, love me some orchestration of data, and really have a deep appreciation and understanding of what that data layer needs to look like.
Wonderful. Jess?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I've been in marketing operations for 15 plus years or so, come from a scientific background, and most of the community and the RevOps and the marketing ops community probably knows me for, I do probably a lot of in-depth architecture for kind of the Marketo and the Adobe ecosystem, but really all of those concepts around like data cleanliness, and what we're going to talk about today, super relevant across any and all platforms.
Awesome. So like I mentioned, I'm going to go over the survey results, and then Jess is going to talk about operating in a world of imperfect data, and then Ali's going to give us some tangible examples and kind of how to, and then we'll have Q&A. So jumping straight into it, I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly, and let me know if I need to slow down, but we're going to talk about the key findings and some things that really stood out to me as both an ex-operations professional, current marketing professional, and data nerd. So really quickly, who we talked to, like I said, we worked really closely at Openprise with MoPros and RevOps Co-op. And unsurprisingly, we had quite a heavy representation of B2B. We had some B2B, B2C with a mix of B2C, and company sizes skewed more heavily towards mid-size or growth stage. And the industries were very heavily represented by information technology and professional services, with a smattering of other stuff. So from that, we had a heavy representation from marketing operations. And then, as you all probably know, marketing operations can kind of be revenue operations or officially part of revenue operations, or revenue operations is just a tiger team of individual operation silos, and that's very much represented in the data. And we had quite a few managers and individual contributors. And as we know, a lot of us can be managers without managing a team, and we're managing systems. So it's a little hard to tell from the data exactly where people are focusing most of their time. So another thing that's not surprising to me as an ex-operations professional, 99% of us are struggling with some technical aspect of data. And by technical aspect, we mean duplicates, missing information, stale information, a lot of technical accuracy data points. Only 11% of respondents said that their data quality is excellent, but the really weird thing about that is even the people who said their data was good enough or better, 71% still reported that their data quality negatively impacted the success of their go-to-market activities, which really posed the question, is good enough really good enough if we're still not able to execute well? So another really interesting thing that stood out to me as somebody who's in operations and now in marketing and leadership, operators tend to rely pretty heavily when asked what their definition of data quality was on the technical aspects. So accuracy, completeness, relevance, how fresh it is. But when we ask them what is standing in the way of realizing data quality, the majority leaned very heavily on leadership's attitudes and actions. And underneath that category are things like not enforcing usage of core systems, not investing in things, doesn't understand what's technically possible and not possible, and won't collaborate with the revenue operations or share any ownership in the definition of data quality, which is what we're going to be focusing on very heavily in this webinar. So to reinforce that a bit more, across the board, 79% said their organization doesn't have a shared definition of data quality. 55% said adoption of key systems is not enforced, and 48% said their leadership team does not understand what is and is not possible. And I'm kind of surprised that number isn't a bit higher, having sat on both sides of that fence. But there were some key differences between who said their data was good enough or better and who just reported that their data was flat out poor. So the people with poor data quality were 1.5 times more likely to report that their organization doesn't have a standard definition of data quality. They're 2 times more likely to report adoption of key systems is not enforced, and 2 times more likely to report their departments are siloed and distrust the other team's data. Also 2.6 times more likely to say we don't have the right skills on our team. So just to recap what we saw there and what we'll be talking about, I really challenge the concept of good enough, because if we're struggling to function as an organization, it's probably not good enough. We need to focus a bit more on solving the disconnect between leadership and what's technically possible and what should be done. And teams that have better data have better alignment with leadership and more process automation based on our survey findings. So Jess, I'm going to kick it over to you and ask, what are some key things you've done to help align with leadership? How have you kind of helped bridge that gap?
You know, absolutely. And I think that goes right into, right, how do you get executive leadership to get buy-in to that the data isn't clean, right? And that kind of goes back to you know, kind of the talk track that I've been doing for the past year and a half about translating geek speak to C-suite. But I want to focus specifically kind of on the data part, right? And so one of the things is like data cleanliness. It is data cleansing, all the things that you've talked about. We all know as operations people that it's super important. Sometimes we feel like we're beating our heads against the wall, be like, how come they don't understand? They don't get it. Why do they not understand that this is important? This impacts all these things. And that has to do with how we're talking about it, right? It's that translation piece. Because data state is an enabler. Dirty data or cleaning the data is the how to accomplish the what. And the what is actually what they care about. What does clean data enable? And so a lot of times in operations, we just are so focused on like, well, we don't have this data. If we had better data here, if we had this, if we didn't have duplicates, if. So going to an executive and saying, like, hey, we need investment in tools and time to clean the data doesn't really, what I call, is that fundable? But really pivoting and changing and thinking about what that data enables. Okay, we know that clean data enables it's actually like, I bucket it into two categories in the way that I talk about it to get the investment in time and resources in order to clean that data, which is really around, okay, data and insights, but we know that as operations people, right? But it's like, okay, if we have better insight, what does that enable? It's like, you gotta focus on the lily pads and like hop to, how do we get to ROI and revenue with that? So if we think about it, well, if we have cleaner data, we can slice and dice the data better. Okay, what does that enable? That enables us to make decisions faster or to optimize better. Okay, what does that enable? That enables swag it, right? X percentage, 15% increase in conversions of X to Y, which equals X amount of pipeline, Y amount of closed revenue. If you convert it to that, that becomes a fundable, right? So then you're actually tying, hey, I need X investment, and that will get me Y return. You have to do almost the logic and hop them through that. So that's one aspect of it, right? Smarter decisions yield to increase in revenue, which increases, but you got to do it's just algebra. It's just back of the napkin math. The second aspect of it is around audience targeting and segmentation, right? The better data allows us to more accurately target and segment an audience. Well, we all know that. And if we say that, that's not enough to connect the dots for an executive. What does that mean? How do they feel it in terms of their goals or KPIs of pipeline and revenue? So again, swagging it, if we're able to target audiences better, to give more personalized response, to more accurately target, that swag it, an increase in number of engagements of X, which equals an increase in number of MQLs of Y, which increases the amount of conversions of, right? So if I have this many more MQLs, you know what your MQL conversion rate to meetings, you know what your average number of meetings per meeting, it has a pipeline number, all of that, you should have that have those metrics in your back pocket. Then swag the, hey, if I have a better audience targeting, I'm going to increase engagements, and that's going to increase, I'll be able to deliver 10% more meetings, X% more pipeline, et cetera. So you have to finish the thought. So like, if I were to summarize it, you have to finish the thought of what clean data will equal in terms of revenue, because every initiative that we have it should be focused on what's the impact on revenue, because when you impact revenue, then it becomes fundable. And that's the language that our executives speak, right? So from those two aspects of it. The second, sorry, go ahead. I think.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I really appreciate that you're focusing on the ROI piece, but the other piece that you're speaking to is breaking out data into different types of data, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody tells me in leadership, I don't trust the data, we really need to dig into what exactly are they talking about. Are they talking about sales doesn't know what they're doing to follow up on a lead because they can't tell what campaign they came in on? Or are they talking about mobile phone data from some enrichment provider, right? So I really like that you're breaking things out and focusing on what's important to the business and how to prove ROI. Sorry, go ahead.
No. And I want to address Holly's question around swagging it, meaning like make an estimate, right? We are not launching rocket ships to the moon, right? We're just getting directionally accurate. And so I think a lot of times, especially, what makes us really good operational folks is because we're perfectionists. We're like, we take care of the detail. We're trying to get an order of magnitude of 10, right? Like I went to grad school, my classmate, there was 10 of us. My classmate is actually an astronaut. She's going to the moon in a couple of years. We're not going to the moon, okay? Right? So, she did 2 stints on the International Space Station. I sent emails, I don't know who had a better successful career or not, but okay. Exactly. Swag, wild ass. That's right. Right? And I think, again, we're not going to the moon. Maybe some of us literally are. And we want to focus, I think the second point is focusing on incremental improvements. I think, again, We are really good at what we do. We know we come in and we're like, oh my God, all these things are broken, right? Broken isn't fundable, right? If you remember from marketingops.com and Mopsapalooza conferences, if you've seen me speak, broken is not fundable, but improvement is. And so we don't have to get to perfection. And we shouldn't actually try to build to perfection, because I can tell you, at being a consultant and being in-house at so many companies, the data is never going to be perfect. I hate to break it to you. We're never going to make it to perfection. But you know what? A 10% improvement in data quality is better than 5%. 20% cleanliness in data is better than 10%. Executives want to see progress, right? So we're so focused on, oh my God, it's not perfect and it'll take me 18 months. I don't know if we're going to be here in 18 months to get there, right? Because the goals, if we say like we can't fix it until 18 months from now, we're focused on like, are we hitting our goals this quarter? So focusing on what's the plan to get us better. Hey, by next quarter, we're going to have 50% cleanliness in data. That's double than where we are at 25%. So setting and showing progress and milestones and showing those incremental improvements is really, really important. And then so I'll kind of move on to kind of the third point, which is around, we want to design our systems, right? For like, hey, in the ideal state, what is it? But in the knowing that the data is never perfect. We're never going to get 100% of, cleanliness, or 100%, no more duplicates, said no system ever, right? I actually kind of midway through my career, actually started building the processes and infrastructure to get to, hey, you know what? My systems need to operate with about 80%, let's just pretend 80% cleanliness. So there's actually processes in place so that with the expectation that, hey, data is not going to be perfect. And I actually have systems and processes to handle imperfect data, right? Because the thing is, if we try to build for perfect, then the systems and the processes become brittle and then they break. So it's almost like, we're building a building for earthquakes. It needs to absorb. It needs to be able to absorb the imperfections in our data, right? Just like an earthquake, a building has to be able to wobble, to kind of think about, to absorb the impact of imperfect data, right? So that the system, like things don't just fail, that there are safety nets. And we as operations folks naturally think about building safety nets, but just kind of planning for our data earthquake. Maybe that'll be a next new meme. What do you think?
I do not want a data earthquake. Thank you very much. I would prefer.
We all kind of have them.
So I just want to add a few things on there. I want to kind of go back to a second to that 71% of people that say that they still struggle for go-to-market. I think in my situation, like we have very clean data. We have gone through a lot of steps because I am a data, I am an advocate for this. But our business changes very quickly because we like to buy companies. And so we have a lot of migrations that happen. We have a lot of pivots in strategy. And that's where it is hard for us to match the go-to-market motion in the systems. As clean as our data is, it's not, we just don't always have the resources, like the headcount, the people, the ability to move super fast when ingesting these migrations, pivoting to a data infrastructure that might support this one specific segmentation type or, different audience type. Maybe we haven't built that muscle up to get to that audience. Like, for example, we purchased a company that is healthcare data privacy or data security. And that's not ever a space we played in. So we don't have any prospect data that way. We don't have any segmentation built that way. Our website doesn't really have any functionality for that. So there's a whole piece that we have to do to go to market to be able to support that line of business that just doesn't even exist. So my takeaway would be, if you've got exceptionally clean data, but you're still saying that it's hard to go to market, there's other factors that are factoring into that.
For sure, that's a great point. And you're not alone, because if 99% of people are struggling with this, and it really depends on what the data is. So if you have core factors for segmentation, chances are pretty high that you can get close to them if there's something like industry or maybe even technology if it's web-based. Where people really struggle and will always struggle is something like mobile phone data and employee data, because there's a ton of attrition and et cetera, et cetera. Jess, is there anything else you'd like to add about the technical data issues that folks run into?
I think just kind of in seeing the chat and the conversations, right, and kind of what Ali was saying, right, it is never a done and solved problem, right? I think people thinking that it's an end destination, I'm going to make it to the finish line. Well, there isn't a finish line, sorry to disappoint you. And I think it's, when I look at the systems and data, is humility, right, which is, the data is a living and breathing, data and systems are a living and breathing and changing thing. It's not a static ecosystem, right? It is a point in time. And so it's like you're trying to chase, the finish line. There's no finish line. I think if you just this is where the mindfulness in MarTech comes in what we do, right? So we just accept the fact that it's actually forever changing, and that we have to just adapt to what it is today, knowing what that is, and just accepting that there's always going to be change and adapting to that, and that there is no finish line. There is no, hey, I think a lot of times when we think about, even if you think about the language that we use, which is, hey, when my data is clean, we can do this. When we arrive at this fictitious endpoint, we'll be able to do this. And I had to switch that mindset, because otherwise you were chasing something that was never going to be done. And I always feel like we're always going to fail because we're chasing like the mirage that's out there. And so if we flip it to, okay, and this is for executive, this will also help in that executive conversation, is what can we do today? What can we fix tomorrow that makes incremental improvement that will be able to give us something, a net new capability next month, right? Something that is tangible and not the, far into the future, that may never happen, and waiting for this day that may never come. And I think having that mindset will help, get kind of those actionable things I'm sure Ali's going to go into in terms of like, what do you, out of all of the data that came from the survey, what do you do with it? But then taking the approach that I'm talking about, which is, okay, how do you think about architecting your systems and processes with this in mind, to show progress, right? And what are the revenue outcomes what are the outcomes, business outcomes that can be tied to these initiatives?
So speaking of that transition to focusing on like tactical, how do we actually do this? Ali, do you want to take it away?
Sure. So, to me, there's your basic standard, like washing machine processes that make your data as clean as possible. Dedupe processes, standardization of, capitalization and things like that, making sure that domains are spelled appropriately, making sure that, common domains, I should say, making sure things like you have .com in an email address and not .co if it's supposed to be .com, or, .cod or something weird, like some misspelled things. Things that are easy to automate, to fix, you do that right away. And then you start mapping some white space there. Like, are you missing job titles? How do you go get those? Are you missing the right people in general to fill out your account profiles? Do you have them bucketed into the right contact roles so that marketing can go and make sure they're talking to the right people that are attached to the account? Like there's like granular levels that we start looking at and saying, okay, we're gonna go figure out how to fix this problem today. Tomorrow we're gonna go figure out this problem. And once you start breaking it down into those, here's a gap we have in the data, let's go fix it. it makes it much easier to sort of digestible like improvements and really show how you're creating complete records for people. And then also like there's only one record and why there's only one record, why that's important. It makes it much easier to present that back to your stakeholders. And what I find when I start getting into why we can or can't do something is I have to very much explain it in real people terms, not, you know, terms that are in your CRM. Like if I start talking leader contact to a lot of people outside of like, you know, the general population of folks that run, even our marketing teams sometimes struggle with that sort of concept. You have to start talking about it like in terms of people and what that person's doing and all the information about that person that's so critical to your demographic scoring and your account scoring and things like that. So we have to make it very tangible. And a lot of times I hear, well, we want to automate these things, or we want AI. AI is going to be magical. And I'm like, AI can only do what can only be as great as the data quality you have. And then I start talking about it in terms of a roller coaster. I'm like, imagine you're on a roller coaster and suddenly you have a gap in the tracks. What happens to those carts if you're like on an upside down turvy thing? Like you're gonna run into massive problems. You're gonna get derailed. You are gonna, you know, potentially have a catastrophe. It's the same process with your data. You have to kind of break it down and explain it to them in real world scenarios that they can get a picture of, versus the way that all of our minds work, which is, I just think my mind works like a Marketo smart list all the time. Like I'm always just like, what can I add in? What can I take away to get down to that like thing that I'm looking for? So I think that those are like some of my big, you know, aha moments as growing in this type of role, is that how do you real people speak, break down what we do. And so that's kind of how I get buy-in across the org when we start talking about different tools that we need. And I give them very real scenarios of things that they're like frustrated that they don't have. So an example of that would be, we wanted to speak to a certain persona. You know, we were like, we needed to target this persona. And I was like, well, you don't have the data to do that. And they're like, what do you mean? And so I'm like, that persona means that these titles. If we don't have these titles, then we don't have this persona. And if the titles are such a hot mess that we can't say, I need, you know, all the VPs of marketing and all the versions of that, and they aren't broken into some like very clean bucket of, this is the functional role they sit in marketing. They are the decision maker. They are the executive, you know, like in these types of kind of very clear buckets that you can organize the data in, so that when you're doing some of these automated processes, like I need to hit all of the executives and all of the decision makers and all of the influencers of the marketing in this campaign in my database. Well, you can easily pull that very simply, versus go and, you know, create an includes of like VP of marketing, vice president of marketing, and like all these different things. If you already have that cleaned up and ready to go using an orchestration tool, it's much easier. So I just really got very granular and gave them clear examples of why we can or can't do something and how we get to the point that we can do it. And that's the way that I have always built buy-in for some of these things. It's similar to what Jessica was talking about, right? Like, what's the business outcome you're looking for? But it's giving them that real world, tangible business outcome, even beyond how much more pipe you can get, more like how many ways can we slice this data and report out on success beyond, did we build pipeline? We know we're going to build pipeline, but how do we get to this place that that shows that we not only built this pipeline, but this is how much white space we have. This is what we can go after now from a sales organization and a marketing organization. And this is a very clean view of where we can take some actions. So we'll talk about one workflow that we built recently and I'll explain to you, I'll walk you through it in a second. If we want to go to the next slides. Oh.
Sorry. So when it comes to poor data quality getting in the way of activities, you give a really great example of not having titles normalized and being able to segment them, or do you have an example where data, either Jess or Allie, where data really got in the way of making a solid strategic decision? Because I have one, I'm sure we all have a few.
If you've got one off the top of your head, go for it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I do some consulting and I focus really heavily on data schema and data structure, which is data management. And one of the reasons I do that is because I found that a lot of organizations are very passionate about what their ideal customer profile is, but they rarely know what their ideal customer profile is. And when you're not going into the data and verifying what you suspect, and what I see a lot, and especially in really early stage companies, is they've had this really big deal. They want to go after enterprise organizations now. And what they're not looking at is the cost of maintaining that business versus how much money they're getting in. And they're also not looking at what does their normal deal distribution look like? And is mid-market really your bread and butter? And are they more profitable to retain as customers? So that's one major thing I see a lot of early stage companies repeat over and over again, kind of like Groundhog's Day.
Yeah, I see that too. I've also seen, like, we want to go up market, and we're so excited to go up market from being, like an SMB focused company with not even just the data mechanisms, that doesn't exist, but then also you don't have the team structures or the experience on the teams to do that, because those motions are so different. And somehow a lot of times executives don't even understand that. So you can use data, but you've got to use that data with that, also with that real world language. That's like, look, the majority of your clients or customers are these SMBs, and this is the way they buy from you. And now, fast forward, if you're going to go up market, you need multiple buyers in the decision-making process. You've got, a much longer sales cycle. You've got all these things you need to account for. So your systems and your data and your processes need to match all of that. And really architecting and outlining that, because there's a lot of people that think they can just be like, let's just go focus on these accounts now. And they're, enterprise, and we can go for it. No, girlfriend, you can't do that. Like, that's not real. And so really breaking that down for them and making them understand that sometimes is, a challenge in itself. So pivoting to this, this is just one small example of something we did that really made it much more easy and malleable for our marketing team to run some customer-facing programs. We, like most companies, are challenged with churn. So we implemented a voice of the customer program. And in order to do that, the way we were executing it, we wanted to be at the most granular level of products that they have and focus our surveys around certain product specifics every quarter. And so if you guys are like us, we have hundreds of products that make up a solution. And sometimes we were getting really nitty gritty on what that product was. And that data only lived on our CPQ quotes. It didn't live anywhere else. And so understanding, we had other roll-ups that were happening, like product family, that we could look at. So, we have a product called Twistle. It's patient engagement. If you're like, what is that weird term? But say we had a Twistle product, there's several layers of products underneath that, but we would roll that up and be like, well, this is a Twistle customer. This is a Vital customer. And like, breaking that down in our bigger product portfolios, but they were getting very granular about the types of questions they wanted to ask, and they didn't want someone to have to go, well, I already use this product, or I don't use that, and like not be targeted specifically. So we were having to do a bunch of pulling out of Salesforce and manual manipulation to get to, does this person in this account, in this survey, use this thing? Which took a lot of time, as you can imagine. So what we did was created and you can kind of go to the next slide. We use a data orchestration tool called Openprise, which I think maybe a lot of you on this call might be familiar with. But we use Openprise to do the data transformation for us. So in Salesforce, we have the CPQ contract data with the list of products they have. It could sometimes be literally 2 to 3 pages of products. They would take it and they would concatenate it into a single field on the account record, because there was no way we were putting in hundreds of fields to map one product, right? So we would concatenate it, and then we could do includes logic in Marketo against that one field that it's going to look at to be able to pull people into the survey. It seems like, something so simple, but you would be surprised at how difficult that is and how much time something like this saves in order to be able to operationalize a program that's been really successful in helping us understand our customer problems and where we might be falling short or might be doing really well as a company. We have teams that are dedicated to analyzing that data, preventing churn, reporting out on churn statistics internally that take all of that data and use it, religiously against everything that they're doing. So, to be able to effectively do that is amazing. It also helps us beyond that specific program with cross-sell, upsell. We're looking at our glide paths right now from if you've got this product or this subset of products, this is where your next path could be. And being able to get really granular with that in our campaigning is really important. And then, it also helps with just basic data segmentation as we're looking at where our white space is or where we could be going, or, so many different ways that we could be analyzing that data that we just couldn't get to in a very easy way before.
Okay, so to recap, Jess and Allie said some really great things that kind of overlapped. It's that geek speak barrier and getting to a common data quality definition, which involves figuring out what's the most critical and where to focus first. Using a designated platform to correct that data can really help automate those repeatable data hygiene tasks. And then a lot of the survey respondents that admitted to having or bragged about having excellent data, because I don't know many people who can say that, said they use custom apps and custom code, like a joined database with an integration that pushes data back and forth based on certain calculations, or hit the easy button and use a tool that's made for that. So before I go to Q&A, I just wanted to bring up the slide with the ungated report that goes over all of the survey responses. So I'm going to try to leave that up here and come back to the main screen. Cool. Okay, I wasn't sure if that was going to break everything. It didn't. And we can start handling some Q&A.
Thank you, Camela, Jessica, and Allie. That was a lot of great information. I just want to throw out there a reminder. You can feel free to ask any questions, whether it's in the chat or we have a dedicated Q&A tab in that side panel for you. We did get a couple of great questions, just kind of revisiting some in the chat here. Jeff had said, when I've heard that the, C-suite doesn't trust the data, what he's noticed is that they just don't study the data to understand it. And how can they expect to trust what they don't know? So maybe is there any advice that we could, kind of give to help the C-suite understand that maybe they do need to start really studying this kind of stuff in order to really help make the biggest impact?
I think it's an opportunity for us as operations professionals, right, to actually, it's an opportunity for us to provide value, right? Because like a C-suite isn't going to get into the technical and that level of granularity of the data of like, oh, what should I trust or what is in there? And I think it's for us to step up. It's that translating. It's like, okay, accuracy in these areas allows us to do X versus in these areas, hey, it's really questionable. Let's say, for example, oh, we can only get to 30% of our database understanding what industry it is. So this is what again, it goes back to what can we do today? Okay, with 30% of the database, I can accurately understand what industry, so that means I can do industry-specific go-to-market motions. But 70% is obfuscated, and so that's the area where like it's not black and white. Like, can we trust all of it or not? Versus, hey, it might be from if I was before Allie did all this amazing work with the product. Hey, we don't trust the data because we don't understand what products our customers own. So that it's going to prevent us from being able to do customer cross-sell upsell because we don't want to look like fools offering something that they already know. And so I think it's for us to kind of play that glue, that connectivity tissue around what does the data enable and what are we hesitant to do based on the data. And then that way we can say, hey, to the executive leaders, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, and this is how we're going to actually make it to make it better. And I think there was another question that I got around, kind of the health of the database. And I think it kind of like is related to this, which is, it's not that, we know, okay, what is the current state of the database and what do we trust it? Is it in good shape or not? And I think it's, a lot of times the CMO that I work for didn't ask about the database health, but I proactively was then reporting out on metrics around the database health, where we are today, what's good, what needs improvement, and then what am I going to do about it and what am I going to deliver in a month? And I think, again, that's another area of opportunity where I proactively send out, or I proactively meet with executive leadership on a monthly basis, a monthly business review, specifically from ops, and actually give updates, it's not the raw, like, here's the health of the data, the database in terms of, this is the number of records we have, this is the number of people that we have per industry. We want to go up market, but guess what? We don't have any enterprise people in our database, right? This is the insight that we're seeing, and this is what we need to change, and this is where I need air cover and help, right? It's like, hey, we want to go up market, but all of our campaigns are bringing in mid-market people, and we're able to improve accuracy on classifying those people. These are the people that I couldn't classify in terms of revenue or like, size. I think we were at like 70%. We were at like 70%, but trajectory wise, we're bringing in way too many mid-market people and not enough enterprise people. That's something actionable that the executives was able to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, as you're in your meetings on a regular basis and fielding questions from people, there are obvious patterns that start showing about what they expect and what your reality is. And you've got to translate the reality. And it's never going to be a direct question about what is the health of our database, because they don't think that way. We think that way. They don't. And so you have to, the biggest things that I tell my teams as I'm like, coaching them on how they can be most effective, is that they have to have active listening skills that really know how to translate what someone's asking for versus what they really need or mean, because they don't always use the same language we do. They don't always know the right words to say, but you have to try to ask the right questions and get things out of them that may help you interpret what they need. And an executive is just never going to be like, how many CMO titles do I have in my database? Like, they're just not going to ask that. They're going to be like, are we hitting the right people with the right message? They're going to ask more basic questions. And then it's up to you to be like, let me show you some data around who we can reach and who we can't, and what we need to do from a targeting perspective to get more of these people in, or from a data enrichment perspective, or from a sales activation perspective. Like, these are the ways that we could get the people that we need to talk to in place. And this is what I would recommend.
I think, and I hope this is more obvious for other folks than it was for me when I figured it out, but when I finally figured out that reports are important and it's really critical to get them right, but once you start taking the time to research why the patterns you see are happening and giving them insights and making recommendations, you move from someone who is providing a board deck or an executive update to somebody who's providing value to the business and actually can change the trajectory of what's happening and identify huge gaps. So taking the time, whether they ask for it or not, to send a message with the report that says, hey, here's what I'm noticing, and talking to a bunch of people, here's what I think is happening, is going to move you from somebody they ask for a report to somebody they look to say, how real is this information? How much should I trust this? And that's a huge change in your career.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all. And again, just revisiting a question from our chat. This was directed at Allie, who, gave a thorough answer, but just opening it up to Camela and Jessica. Any tools or methodologies that are keeping data migrations running smoothly for you guys?
It is an Openprise webinar, so I
Yeah.
feel like
I mean, right? And that's what we use. We can attach Openprise to any of their sale or their ecosystem, like typically their Salesforce or whatever CRM they're using, and we can map and see what new data are we bringing in from them that we don't currently have from a accounts, contacts, and lead perspective. How is that going to affect the size of our database in terms of like paying for Marketo, for example? How many more records are we going to have? How much overlap in their clients do they have from ours? So like it answers a lot of questions before bringing any of that data in for us so that we know, one, what to expect. The other piece to that is we were looking at things like, we had MuleSoft at one point, but it really wasn't as effective as they tried to sell it to us as. So if there's any ways that you can connect your two systems together and auto push things in once you know and map exactly where things are going, that makes a huge difference. Otherwise you do it the old-fashioned way like we do with spreadsheets.
Yeah, and I've also, in the spirit of neutrality, I've also used tools like SQL Server and Google BigQuery and other cloud-based solutions with an ETL system like Fivetran or something along those lines in order to manipulate the data how I need it and then push it back into the system. It's fairly complicated, and there are tools that will do it much easier for you, like Openprise, but it is a great skill set to have, I have to admit.
Yeah, I mean,
I think no matter what tool you use, or you use multiple tools, right? Like, so I'm a huge fan of, like, for example, the data append waterfall model, right? It's not just about one or the other. It's like the whole ecosystem of things. You're going to use lots of different tools. And I think it's really around having that strategy, right? I think it's super important, like what piece of technology is going to do what to what data where. Right? It's the what data, where does the data live? What structure does it need to be in? Which tool is going to manipulate the data? And then having that all work together holistically, and you don't have things tripping over each other.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, especially when you put user entry in there. Whew.
Oh, yeah.
People is a whole different thing, right? Like, then there's training enablement. Like, get out of my system, get out of my house. You're not allowed to dirty my house. Like don't track your muddy footprints in my house.
Yeah.
Unless it's a mobile number.
Yeah.
Right.
The planning process is incredibly important, and we do have a very clear project plan and path that we always take as we're doing these migrations. It's the same repeatable process. A lot of it is talking to the newly acquired company and trying to understand the things that are important to them to run their business and see how we can assimilate that into our own environment or do we have to break the news to them and be like, you can't have that anymore? Because sometimes that's the case too. But there's that planning process to me is really important to getting it right.
I think especially as operations professionals here, and I'm guilty of it too, index very quick. I mean, for primary is the technology piece, right? And then as I've, spent time in my career, and then also, doing the communications and the advocacy for executive leadership, 75% of the job is the people and processes. That's where I find a lot of times like the things that go awry, right? We design system processes, and then guilty of the fact that like, how come nobody follows our processes, right? And so it's almost like we have to absorb, not only are we absorbing the earthquake of bad data, but also absorbing for imperfection in the people variable of people following processes. So I'm actually designing processes for data and data entry and collection. I'm trying to minimize, the potential for errors and removing as much from a people variable as possible, because there's 10 ways to like ingest data. If it involves more people, then that's just the higher likelihood of like, well, if we ingest it that way, the likelihood of this being accurate is going to be really low. Like if a person standing at a booth has to check a box to know what product they're interested in, what's the likelihood of that data actually coming into my system? Probably pretty low. So I think there's also that aspect as well, which was, after a decade's worth of trying to get people to just follow a list upload process, it's just, I just want to automate as much as possible. But then the training and enablement.
I love that. And just to kind of round everything out, what are some practical steps people can take today, this quarter, next quarter? Where can they start taking some steps to really make a big improvement here?
I mean, I think first is understanding where you have gaps and what the problem is, like where is the dirtiness coming from, and how to stop that bleeding first. Because like when I worked at Rackspace, we had, it seems so silly now, but we were like taking leads from the website and putting them right into Salesforce through a Salesforce form, bypassing Marketo, and then wondering why suddenly we had 80% duplication in both systems. Can't imagine why that would happen, you guys. So like just sort of, looking at that and going, let's do this the smart, practical way where we have one point of entry that can dedupe on contact, immediately and try to like stop that bleed. And then, okay, now what's the cleanup process look like? It's taking it in steps and chunks and really identifying what the biggest pain points are and starting there.
Talk to people, talk to leadership. I called it myth busting. I would carve out a few minutes at the beginning of my day, and I would, back when we were offices, I would stop by each office and say, hey, what are you hearing? And I'd get all these rumors about, a lot of it had to do with data. And then I'd go around and but talking to people, even asking for 5 to 10 minutes and just having a set of questions ready for them if they're super busy, that can go a really long way in categorizing the data in terms of how people are thinking about it and what they find critical to do their jobs on the executive team.
I mean, I challenge everyone to kind of think about the words that they're using to the executives. And you can find me on LinkedIn or Marketing Ops Slack channel. And so if you wanted to run anything by me or be like, hey, Jess, how would you translate this? I'm happy to soundboard and be that sounding board or just kind of repeat it back to you all in kind of exec speak. So please feel free to reach out. But challenging yourself and like, look at how you're talking about the operation stuff. Like look at the geek speak and the data that you're talking and kind of challenge yourself of like, okay, this is the how, but what am I trying to accomplish and why? And that I think will lead you to the path of the executive speak. And you might find yourself surprised around like getting support and getting support funding and resources to go accomplish, or just even just a different reaction and just like advocacy for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Love that. I hope you all picked up on half as many tips and tricks as I did from today's session. Thank you, Camela, Ali, and Jessica for your expertise and sharing that with all of us today. And that's about all the time that we have. So thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your day.